Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Yolanda Melody. Did you know that most schools in the US, UK and many other countries are now teaching about gender fluidity, sexuality preferences, and are promoting the idea that your biological sex may not reflect your gender identity? All of these things that I've mentioned and much more has now become part of the school curriculum and is now being taught to not only children in secondary school, but primary school as well, sometimes as young as 5 years old.
Today, I wanted to introduce you to a new friend in our class. Well, this, Huckleberries, is my friend Nash. It's their first day in our class. They're just looking around at all of you, and they're so curious to know who you all are. Yeah, just like me. So Nash, just like me, is non-binary. So they aren't sure if they're a boy or a girl. So when people ask them, are you a boy or a girl? Right now they just feel like saying, I'm a kid. They're figuring it out.
Why does he like stars?
They like stars.
They like stars.
Yeah. And they are
why did
really...
he wear a star shirt?
They wore their star shirt because it's their favorite shirt, and because they were nervous today, they thought they would wear something that makes them feel special. Today was fun. It was really interesting though, knowing going in, being like, I don't know what questions kiddos are gonna have or what they're gonna say, which is both like nerve-wracking, but also kind of exciting. It's that place of not knowing as a teacher and just being okay with that. And the friend likes to ask the question, are you a boy or a girl? And Nash answers, I'm just a kid.
But kids can be boys or
They can be boys or girls. Yeah.
Or maybe non-binary.
Yeah.
It was just like non-binary, yeah. That's just something that we know. This is something, I mean, it's like, they're 4 and 5 years old and they just didn't make a big deal out of being a boy or a girl.
And I think it was a huge testament to how much we've been talking about it in the classroom that you never mentioned the term non-binary. It was a child who brought that up because it's constantly in conversation.
Not only that, but some of these gender-themed lessons also include games revolving around subjects such as masturbation, and are teaching children about different ways to engage in sexual activity depending on your sexual preference. Upon hearing all of this, if you have not been made aware of this already, you may be thinking that these claims are either largely exaggerated or that somehow this is some crazy rumour that's being bandied about. But I am here to confirm that everything I have just said has been confirmed by teachers that I know personally. And for the sake of anonymity, I will be referencing from multiple articles written by people who are concerned about this. However, I just want to stress that everything I will be mentioning, I know from first hand that this is definitely going on. I want to make this video to warn any parent that has a child in school at the moment that these children are being indoctrinated into an ideology that is not based in any form of science, that is not only causing mass confusion amongst children, but is also leading them down a potentially dangerous path, all under the guise of inclusivity. Since gender ideology has been brought into the school curriculum, there is now an ever-growing percentage of children that are changing their pronouns, sometimes multiple times a day. There are many children that are changing their name, and the number just keeps growing. And the reasons why I am concerned about this is not because of transphobia. I am aware that there are some people who have transitioned and are actually happy and glad they made the decision. However, my concerns are obviously that ideas are being put in children's minds that they otherwise wouldn't have had in the first place, And the reality of being transgender is not an easy ride. The transitioning process involves endless amounts of medical procedures, emotional turmoil, the requirement to take hormones for the rest of your life. The list is endless, but if you do want to know more about this, I have also done a video titled "Are You Really Trans?" Okay, so what we're going to do now is read an article from a website titled transgendertrend.com. The reason why I picked this article is because it outlines absolutely everything that I have heard personally from teachers, and it really does stress the absurdity of what is going on. So it says here, the DfE made relationships and sex education compulsory in England in 2020. But whether by accident or design, the wording in the statutory guidance has allowed some of the most adverse political and ideological organisations into schools where they are able to teach gender ideology under the cover of the government's own regulations. The guidance says this: pupils should be taught the facts and laws about sex, sexuality, sexual health and gender identity. But in fact, there is no law on gender identity. And as well as there being no legal basis for it, there is no scientific evidence that we are born with a gender identity and that it can override biological sex in determining whether a child is a boy or a girl. But this is what's being taught in schools and is justified as being LGBT inclusion. I have seen lesson plans, actual lesson plans, outlining all about this idea that it's up to every individual to just find out what their gender is. As if it's some kind of quest, like a never-ending question. I have seen things written by teachers that say that there are more than two genders, and there are many contradictions because, on one hand, gender is a spectrum, apparently. That's what this gender ideology promotes. That there is not just male or female, there's all these other things in between. But when it comes to transitioning, there is only two options. You can either transition from male to female or female to male. Doesn't sound very inclusive to me. Why is it that the medical profession is not being questioned about this? Anyway, let's read on. The term LGBT itself is constantly expanding. It's become LGBTQIA+. The acronym has actually become way bigger than that now. But let's read on. It's worth making clear what these additional letters stand for. Q is for queer, A is for asexual. The plus covers any number of things such as drag, fetish, cross-dressing and kink. Queer in this context means to blur boundaries, to destabilise reality, to say it doesn't matter what sex you are, your gender is the most important thing about you. This is a harmful way to teach children about sex. It's become so normalised that the biggest teachers' union, the NEU, has an LGBTQ+ educators network. The established PSHE organisations, who should have been holding the line against gender ideology and be speaking up for children, are themselves promoting the idea that sex is assigned and that we all have an innate gender identity. This is why so many LGBT lobby groups are able to get into schools and teach gender identity. The core ideas of these groups, which are that sex is assigned at birth, that gender identity is real and sex is a spectrum, can all be justified by the official status given to gender identity in the DfE's guidance. It has allowed the use of biologically and legally inaccurate language to become embedded in RSE materials. The big three sex education bodies, Brooke, the PSHE Association, and the Sex Education Forum all use this politicised language and promote these ideas. The PSHE Association tells children at Key Stage 2, so aged 8 to 11, that for some people, gender identity does not correspond with their biological sex. The Sex Education Forum's puberty handout has a section titled How to Adapt Language to Include Menstruators of All Genders. In case you've been living under a rock, using the term man or woman in this day and age has become very risky. Every day I'm hearing a new way of describing a man or a woman, and at this point it becomes that confusing and ridiculous that it actually hurts your head. There are so many things that are useful to learn, so many things you could learn about, most of which they don't teach in schools. But teaching kids all of this cult-like nonsense really does seem to be taking the top priority above everything else. Gender identity seems to be their biggest concern. And what's even worse about this is that the children, after they've been taught this nonsense, they are then tested with a series of questions that if they do not answer according to the ideology, they will get marked down, and it will ultimately affect their grades. So if your child says that a woman is a biological female, they will get marked down. If your child says that there are two genders, they will get marked down. Let's read on. BigTalkEducation, another sex education forum partner, claim without any evidence that everyone has a gender identity and a person's feelings about their gender identity start early. The general consensus from child development specialists states that this is usually around the ages of 2 to 3. So, the problem starts with gender identity being written into statutory guidance as if it has legal standing, and established PSHE providers, like the Sex Education Forum, giving the idea legitimacy. Then you have numerous unregulated PSHE providers who take it into schools. Okay, what I'm about to read is very disturbing. Jigsaw is one of the bigger players. They are also highly secretive. We get many complaints from parents about not being able to see their content. Perhaps this from a lesson for 10 to 11-year-olds is why. The teacher is told, if you have not used all of the puberty flashcards, now is the time to show and explain the words that may be new to the children. This includes ovulation, masturbation, and yeah, I'm gonna have to start censoring what I'm saying here. Emptibation can be simply explained as a time when a person touches their own private parts for pleasure. Stress this is perfectly normal and it is a very private thing to do. The can be explained as the part of a woman's sexual organs that gives her nice feelings when having sex and when memberbating. Now I know that I'm adding humour to the delivery, but I just want to stress this again. This is being taught to 10 to 11-year-old children. Why? Jigsaw then uses the story of racing driver Robert Cowell, who had a sex change surgery in the 1940s, to teach 10 and 11-year-olds about transgender. The children are told Robert was transgender, which meant that he was born with a male body but felt like a female. The doctors helped him start a special process, you're special if you get this, called transitioning, where he changed his male body into a female one. Robert felt much happier living as a female and changed his name to Roberta. Ah, isn't that a nice story? Didn't mention anything about the medical intervention, the hormones that Roberta will have to take for the rest of her life, the endless amount of complications involved with the high level of medication, not to mention the risks involved when Roberta was on the operating table, getting her body completely mutilated. And what about the fact that Roberta has to use something called a dilator for the rest of her life? The open wound that was created by the surgeon that they call a vagina needs to be kept open, so things like this need to be inserted up to 3 times every single day for the rest of her life. But no, Roberta's living her best life. Some of the overly political groups operating in schools are funded by government or local government. What a surprise. They are not specialist RSE providers, but go into schools claiming to teach diversity or to give LGBT workshops. Educate and Celebrate, whose motto is smash heteronormativity. That's all you straight people. All you gender norm people. Yeah, Educate and Celebrate, they're coming for you. Tells school nurseries to use the terms parent 1 and parent 2, rather than mum and dad, and to call children students instead of girls and boys, because the word mum and dad is very offensive, and boy and girl, that's presumptuous. The Proud Trust have produced a sexual health toolkit for children aged 13 and up, which uses language completely unmoored from sexual bodies. The toolkit contains a dice game based on a 6-sided dice with a word on each side. Vulva, including vagina, penis, anus, mouth, hands, fingers, and object. The game is to roll the 2 dice, and then the class will discuss what sexual activity is possible using the 2 words that face upwards. This to me sounds like an 18-up adult couples game. Just think about what I have just told you. I have to ask, yet again, why do children need to know this? Gendered Intelligence is a trans-only charity which campaigns to remove existing safeguards on prescribing puberty blockers. They give workshops in schools which tell children young people can come to recognise that they are trans at any age. No one is too young to have their gender respected. Age does not tell you when someone will think, know, or be certain that they are trans. Okay, enough of that article. I think we've heard enough. I am not a parent, but I am concerned about this because I can just see that if something doesn't change, we will see an entire generation of detransitioners. Children who were led to believe that transitioning is an easy process, that it's normal to transition, it's normal to have gender dysphoria, and that there's no problem with gender dysphoria. In fact, it's not a mental illness, it's, I don't know what you can call it nowadays, a feeling. Now, I just want to briefly mention that when I was a child, I wanted to be a boy. I was virtually the only child in the entire school that had this feeling that I was the opposite sex. And when I say that it was gender dysphoria, I really can't stress enough. I changed my name, I changed my pronouns. I didn't even know what pronouns were back then. I just wanted everyone to call me a he because that's how I saw myself, because, I don't know, I liked the Disney characters that were male. And I identified with them because I was a child. As I started to develop and hormones kicked in, my normal natural hormones, one day I just decided that, hey, it's not so bad being female. It really was that simple. There is no scientific evidence that explains what goes on with gender dysphoria and why it happens, how to potentially fix it. And again, it's not transphobic me saying this. Gender dysphoria is not a pleasant experience. I've heard trans people even say that, you know what, if there was a cure for it, I'd rather take that route than go through what I went through, but here we are. Children, as we know, are very easily influenced. The mind is very powerful as well. Even as an adult, we can still be influenced if we're told something over and over again and it's drilled into our mind. We can form a belief system. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. I obviously have way more to say about this subject than I intended. So I think I'm going to do a part 2 to this. And in part 2, I'm going to dive even deeper, but not just that, I want to give some advice from my perspective on what we can actually do about this. There was a whole other article that I wanted to read out to you guys, so stay tuned for next week's video. If you enjoyed this one, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Love you, bye.